Hey everybody, Plushie here. And I know it's been a whole week, but it's finally time for us to tackle the brand new SSR Archer for the first Ordeal Call chapter, Durga. Can she survive against all the other fierce competition in the AoE SSR Archer category, or is she yet another bait before the anniversary/summer season? Let's find out in today's hot take video. Usually I don't immediately go into a character's card MP gain, but I think it is important to preface this before we get into any of her skills. Durga has a base MP gain of 0.3 and she has a 4 hits arts card. If you have no idea what that means, this means that she has one of the worst arts cards in the game. Worse than characters that we usually associate with bad arts cards, such as Nidokris Alter and Abigail. So yeah, her cards aren't too amazing, especially her arts card, but her MP is really high hit count and that is how it is balanced. But without further ado, let's get into her skills. Durga's first skill is a 50 MP battery, with the added effect of giving the entire team a one-time OC boost by 1 for 3 turns. This is a pretty standard 50 MP battery effect, and you usually do only use it for the battery. However, in certain cases, this can provide your team with a lot more value. Durga's MP has a anti-demonic MP power mod, so if you know you are going to face off against a certain wave with demonic enemies, you can save this effect for that particular wave to massively boost their MP damage. This is also a team-wide effect that can benefit her teammates. So in a more high difficulty quest context, this can obviously help Castoria, giving her MP a extra stack of solemn defense, and this can also benefit other common art supports such as Lady Avalon and Tamamo, albeit to a lesser extent. This can also benefit her other damage dealer partners if you use her in multi-core farming. There are a lot of servants that have their MP effects scale with overcharge that are very beneficial, such as, another anti-trait, or MPs that gain back MP depending on overcharge, such as Artoria, or MPs that scale their damage according to their overcharge, such as, more drastically, people like Arash, or to a lesser extent, characters such as Space Ishtar or Tezcali Polka, who gets a MP damage up effect before the MP and the skills with overcharge. So overall, this is a really good skill that can be good in both farming as well as high difficulty quests. Depending on what partners you pair her with, this can be even a super massive effect as well, but at the very least it is a 50 MP battery and a anti-demonic damage boost for her own MP. Durga's skill 2 is a 3x3 turn invul tagged onto a 20% rainbow buff. This is a pretty good survival skill, even in the worst case scenario where she's soloing and she's getting hit 3 times in a single turn. This is still a 1-turn invul effect, which is not too shabby at all. But usually you are putting her in a team, and this can very well last the entirety of the 3 turns without her getting hit over 3 times. This is tagged onto an offensive effect, and usually you don't want hard survival skills to be tied to an offensive effect, but because of how long it lasts and how many hits of hard defense it provides, you can just throw this out whenever. If you just want the card buff effect, it will still not waste this invul effect most of the time. However, the 20% rainbow buff is certainly a letdown in my personal opinion. She already doesn't have amazing cards, and she is usually used as a arts farmer, so her quick and buster boosts are usually not being used, and also 20% is just such a puny number. And as you will see in her next skill, as well as her mainly MP spamming playstyle in general, I would much rather take a larger number on a pure arts boost instead of a rainbow buff, so this definitely feels like a bit of a letdown in terms of the offensive side. So overall, this is an okay skill, but yeah, if you're just considering farming, it's pretty bad. Durga's third skill is a 3-turn 30% MP damage up. It turns her entire deck to arts cards for a single turn, and finally it gives her a 1-turn invul pierce, all on a 5-turn cooldown, which is rather short. A 3-turn 30% MP damage up is a pretty good self-steroid for farming, especially if you take Oberon into consideration. The turn your entire deck into arts card effect, however, is a little bit more awkward. In farming, you usually don't want to rely on face cards, especially for an AoE arts looper, and even if you do rely on it, you can get screwed over by not getting a single card on a certain given wave, so I don't recommend it at all. It's just that much worse than Saber Artorias effect because Buster cards are at least good at doing damage, while arts cards are not. And it doesn't help that her arts cards are very, very bad in terms of refund. This is also why I wish her second skill wasn't a rainbow buff, but instead a full arts buff. Maybe that would have made this effect a little bit better. This effect obviously does still come into play in certain situations. For example, in high difficulty quests, this will make her ability to make MPAA Brave Chains a lot more consistent for a single turn. However, in general, I think it's more of a fancy effect rather than a practical effect. And finally, it has a one-turn Invul Pierce, so it does include her cards as well. However, it is also very awkward because it is tied to her best self steroid, so usually you want to use this skill as fast as possible to boost her MP damage, meaning that you cannot save this for a meaningful, turn for your opponent's Invul/evade effect. I would have much rather taken this on her MP or for a 3-turn effect instead of a 1-turn effect. So overall, this is still a pretty good skill, especially considering its cooldown is only 5. However, I think the other 2 effects outside of the MP damage up is a little bit awkward to use because they only last for a single turn. Now let's take a look at Durga's passives. So Durga, first and foremost, has the deadly combo of Magic Resistance A with Goddess Essence B, giving her a total magic resistance of 42.5%. This can wall off a lot of random debuffs the enemy throws at you, and in a high difficulty quest, over time this can provide you with immense value. She also has Riding A. Her quick cards isn't horrible, but usually you don't want to use her quick cards anyways, especially considering her skill 3 also turns her entire deck into arts. This isn't going to come into play too often. She also has Independent Action C, which gives her a very tiny crit boost, but it pairs pretty okay with her special passive, Divinely Bestowed Arms, which gives her a 10% passive arts boost as well as an additional 10% crit buff. So she has a passive 16% crit buff, which is pretty nice, and she gets a 10% passive arts boost, which is always really solid for a arts looper, especially for someone who also has trouble with refunding on their arts card. This definitely helps it a little bit. And finally, Durga's MP is an 8-hit AoE Arts MP that gives her a 50% anti-sky power mod for a single turn, meaning that it does extend to her face cards after the MP for that turn. It also reduces all enemies' defenses by 20% for 3 turns. Unfortunately, it does trigger after the MP does damage. And finally, it has an overcharge effect of anti-demonic damage that scales from 150% all the way up to 200%. So this is obviously the highlight of her entire kit. Her MP rate is a little bit crippled, but is not crippled to the point like it's like cast skill where she actually cannot loop. She loops very well with double Castoria, being able to compete with Jarcher, who has some of the best AoE arts refunds in the entire game. This definitely makes her MP really competitive in the farming aspect. Her MP also has both anti-sky and anti-demonic damage. These 2 effects usually don't overlap, considering most demonic enemies are earth attribute. However, on the flip side, this also means that she has really good coverage, being able to cover most trash mobs that are earth attribute and demonic, but also cover a lot of divine servants that are sky attribute as well. I would have liked it if they swapped around the 2 effects, making the anti-demonic the power mod and the anti-sky the overcharge effect. However, that is just a little bit of a nitpick. I think either way works pretty well. This MP, of course, also reduces all enemies' defense by a whopping 20%. It's actually quite a big number, and it's also 3 turns, so it does scale up if you are using her in a challenge quest against enemies with break bars. However, this does not come into play in farming at all. So how do I feel about Durga? Well, first of all, let's talk about the aspect that most people came here for, which is her ability to farm. Her 2 most obvious competitions are going to be Zenobia and Jarcher. Both are pretty good AoE arts loopers. Now, I did my calculations with the Aresh bot, which is a very convenient tool present in some public FGO Discord servers such as Atlas Academy and our Grand Order. Because I do not have my own Jarcher, therefore I cannot test with double Castoria on Jarcher, which is going to be the most common team you will be using on all 3 of these servants. Obviously, calculation results is not going to completely reflect real life situations, but in general, their comparisons or their relative refunds should be pretty close to the calculations. Jarcher in general is going to have better refund. However, the difference in my opinion in general is not big enough so that, they have really huge discrepancies in terms of the nodes that they can do. Durga can absolutely loop fine on Berserkers with Black Grail, so I do not see that as a problem. As for Zenobia, her refund is very close to Durga with double Castoria, and that is considering her skill 1's passive gain already, so Durga has a full 50 MP battery ahead of her. So Durga is obviously going to have a lot more flexibility in terms of team comps, and in terms of the nodes she is able to loop. But perhaps the bigger edge that Durga has against the other 2 options is her farming damage. Durga has the 4th highest attack stat in the entire game, making her the Knight class with the highest attack stat in FGO, which is pretty incredible. This places her firmly above the other 2 options in terms of farming damage even before we consider anti-trait. And speaking of anti-trait, Jarcher has none, Zenobia has a very niche anti-king, while Durga has extremely wide coverage with both anti-demonic and anti-sky. As I mentioned before when talking about her MP, despite these 2 traits rarely overlapping, these 2 traits cast a extremely wide net for Durga to do extra damage to, and in today's meta, with 90++ nodes being rampant, you need all the damage you can have, and anti-trait is the new meta in my personal opinion. So with all of these combined, I think Durga is firmly above the other 2 options in terms of farming. However, is Durga so much better than the other 2 options that you want to roll her despite already having someone like Jarcher and Zenobia? I think the answer is no. Zenobia in particular is very accessible, being a permanent 4-star, so if you have Zenobia at relatively high MP like MP3, perhaps you don't really want to roll for a MP1 Durga, and especially if you already have Jarcher at MP2 or MP3, Durga is definitely not a recommended pull in my opinion. She doesn't offer anything special outside of the anti-trait, she doesn't give the team any buffs either, so anti-trait while being good is very reliant on nodes, and Losango can very easily just not give you good nodes that Durga can counter. And by then she would just be a very, very slightly better Jarcher, which is definitely nothing to be impressed at. Even though Durga pretty firmly outcompetes her other 2 AoE Arts Archer peers, she's not out of the woods yet, because the real boogeyman of AoE Arts loopers, Summer Ibuki, is right behind her. Now, I don't want to get too much into Summer Ibuki since this isn't a video about her. After using her for basically a year and using her in more than 70% of my 90++ farmings, I can firmly say her mere existence devalues every other arts AoEs in the game. These days, it's just very hard to justify pulling for any other AoE arts if you have a hyper invested Summer Ibuki, or even just have her at like MP2 or 3 and if you grail her or something. With Summer Rerun potentially on the horizon, you might want to just wait for Summer Ibuki instead of pulling for Durga. These days, it's very hard to stand out as an AoE arts unless you provide really good team utility. For example, someone like Tezcatli Polka can distinct themselves from Summer Ibuki. Durga is the complete opposite of that. Durga doesn't provide much team utility outside of the overcharge, which is pretty situational. In fact, she provides even less team utility than Summer Ibuki because Summer Ibuki's first skill is at least a team-wide buff. Durga has one small saving grace as she is an anti-sky servant, so she doesn't overlap with Summer Ibuki's anti-earth, so there are certain cases where she is going to outperform Summer Ibuki, and in general she also does outperform Summer Ibuki as a main damage dealer against sabers, but that's not really saying much. If you really want to invest in someone, you want to invest in a character that can deal with so much stuff, and Summer Ibuki being a berserker is exactly that. So very unfortunate, because of Summer Ibuki's existence, I cannot really recommend very highly for you to pull for Durga, especially considering the timing. In terms of challenge quests, Durga actually has quite a bit of good traits that will put her above other options of the same class. Durga's first skill, as I mentioned before, has superb synergy with Castoria's MP, allowing Castoria to get one extra stack of solid defense. Durga's second skill is a wonderful survival skill that can straight up allow her to not take damage for long extended periods of time. Durga's third skill's Invul Pierce in particular, although a bit awkward, is still a great option against enemies with unremovable invuls and evades. And the Arts card deck transformation does allow her to get a little bit more consistent when she wants to do MPAA Brave Chains. Also, Durga's two anti-traits are not just good against farming, but also obviously very good against boss fights. Demonic and Sky are both relatively common traits among bosses, and there are certain bosses that have both traits, which ironically Ibuki is one of them, so I guess Durga can get her revenge in this form against Ibuki. However, being a good arts servant against challenge quests in a full-on arts team is not really something to boast about, because usually you are still hard carried by Castoria. There aren't really a lot of stuff that Durga can do, but someone like Jarcher or Zenobia can't do if you just take a couple extra turns, unless you're super into min turns and stuff. Having a good AoE arts servant that is good against challenge quests doesn't really speak that much. Also, when we talk about challenge quests and min turns, that means every card type is fair game, and there are a lot of monsters in the AoE Archer category, such as Gilgamesh, Ishtar, and Tesla, and more importantly, all of them have upgraded MPs. So despite Durga having two pretty solid anti-traits, she might not be able to outdamage these other options. I'm not saying Durga is bad or obsolete because these three archers exist, but I am saying that if you already have these archers as options, you might not want to pull for Durga. One more small gripe I have with Durga is how she's bad at soloing. I know most people don't want to solo with her, but because I solo so much with her, I want to share my experience. Her skill 2 is very deceptive. Having a 3-turn 3-time invul usually indicates a servant with pretty good survival and pretty good ability to solo. However, her crappy cards combined with her other two skill effects, essentially hyper focusing on her spamming her MP instead of holding her own with her face cards, make her a pretty bad solo unit. Overall, Durga is not really a bad servant. Durga isn't really a mid servant either, as she pretty firmly outcompetes her other two AoE archer peers, especially considering today's 90++ meta, where damage and anti-trait is king. However, Durga is also a servant that is released in a very awkward time, where Summer 7 rerun can potentially be coming, where Summer Ibuki is a strictly better option, and Anniversary and the new summer is also coming, where you don't know what kind of monsters they will release. If you don't really have a super high interest in this character, I would not recommend pulling for her at all, especially at this time. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I do like Durga a lot, pretty evident by me 120ing her, but I don't have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, to say about her, unfortunately, because of how simple she is compared to previous stuff we've already seen. However, Durga still has one of the coolest designs in the game in her Kali Ascension, so I can totally understand if you really want to pull for her still, and I wish you better luck than I had with her if you do want to pull for her. And I'll see you guys in the next one.